Today, on what is the fifth day of Christmas, according to a long tradition, we celebrate it as the Feast of the Holy Family. Now, obviously, as our opening prayer instructs us, we do so in order to look to that family to be a model for us in our own families. And that's often where the celebration comes to an end, because unlikely are we to be able to accept that without some angst and maybe even a sense of failure. Indeed, considering that family to have consisted of two of the greatest saints of all the saints as parents, and the Son of God as their child, we can feel like our imperfect and maybe even sometimes dysfunctional families don't really stand a chance of living up to that example of the Holy Family of Nazareth. But before we lose hope that our families could have anything in common with Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, let us examine that family in the light of history rather than in that of piety. Because this family were real flesh and blood human beings, not serene statues in an artistically created creche scene. In fact, they were likely a blended family, which is in accord with an ancient tradition alive even in Nazareth today. And we read in the 13th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel about the brothers of Jesus. Those would be James, or actually Jacob, thus named after Joseph's father, as was traditional. Then Joseph, which means little Joseph, who, as second born, would, according to tradition, be named after his father. And then Simon and Jude. There's also mention of two unnamed sisters. These, according to the tradition of Nazareth, are the children of Joseph's first marriage. Mary, who consecrated herself to a life of virginity as a very young woman, had been promised protection and support in a platonic marriage arranged for her by her parents with the widower Joseph, who would respect Mary's commitment to lifelong chastity, but benefit by having her keep his house and help care for and raise his 6 children. So maybe we can perhaps more clearly appreciate the complications that occurred when Mary was found with child. And if it weren't for an angelic messenger counseling Joseph to go forward, he would have likely ended his betrothal to Mary before ever inviting her to his home in marriage. What the relationship was with Mary's first and only born son, who came into the world admittedly through rather mysterious circumstances, and his father and step-siblings, we can only speculate about that. But if we read between the lines and look a little more closely, we may identify a crack in the veneer of any picture of the Holy Family's perfection in this passage we have heard this evening in regard to the relationship between Jesus and Joseph. In this, the only passage in all the synoptic Gospels that gives us any glimpse of life among this unique family during those hidden years of the childhood of Jesus up through his coming to maturity at Nazareth. We see him now as a 12-year-old boy, indeed on the threshold of adolescence. Thus, typical of that age group, Jesus is testing his wings in what was not only a rather daring way, but one that would be the nightmare of any parent. Indeed, his parents realize he is not with that extended clan from Nazareth as they are journeying home from Jerusalem after that celebration of the Passover. So they're searching frantically for him for 2 whole days before finally finding him on the 3rd, and finding him in the temple, seated with the scholars of the law and in discussion with them. No, it's Mary who speaks up to chastise Jesus, not Joseph, which might suggest that as stepfather, he may have had a certain reticence to do so out of respect for the uniqueness of his stepson. And so he let his mother Mary take that lead in raising him and thus also disciplining him. When Mary asked Jesus why he has put her and his father through this terrible worry, the answer Jesus gives is actually a bit sassy. It's like one given by many a child who needs a defense for their inexcusable behavior. It smacks of saying, well, you just don't understand me, mother, and your husband Joseph isn't my real father anyway, so why should he be so upset? Don't you know I have to be spending time with my real father? We aren't told what the rest of the discussion might have been. It may well have involved some further scolding of Jesus on Mary's part, and maybe even a, don't you take that attitude with your mother or me, young man, from Joseph. Perhaps there was even some silent sulking on that 3-day walk back to Nazareth. But we are told, and this is the important point, that once he got to Nazareth, Jesus was from that point onward obedient to Mary and Joseph. In other words, he was done testing his wings. He accepted their authority over him. Apologies had obviously been made and accepted, forgiveness generously granted, and so reconciliation rather than alienation had occurred. In that we find the holiness of an otherwise very likely all too human family. So that is the central message this feast holds for us. Charity must always not only begin, but actually flourish at home. Indeed, that kind of love that is characterized by patience and kindness, compassion and humility in the face of inevitable tensions, and forgiveness must generously be given when one or more family members fail in those virtues or in the respect and general cooperation that is owed to one another. So let us not regard the family of Nazareth as some unrealistically perfect family to be set on a pedestal, but rather a blended family living a real and thus challenging existence, yet finding a way to do so in a way that is actually holy. So let us strive to do the same by also practicing the virtues of patience and kindness, cemented together by love, proved true by forgiveness, so that no matter what happens in our families, we may find ways to bear with one another lovingly. Indeed, let us not, in some sense of exaggerated piety, ever think that we should or will have perfect families, but rather realize that precisely because we don't and we won't, we are given many opportunities to exercise those virtues that will make our all too human families truly holy as well.